I want to first of all denote the people who worked on this project or these projects. Gretchen was very important, Dan Gowanlock, James Jolliffe, Ryan Samuel, and their affiliation I've got denoted here. All of this work took a tremendous amount of effort, and as you can see, or as you will see, it took a team effort from not just Ohio State, but also from industry as well as Michigan State. By the way, I don't know if Michigan State's going to win this year, but our plans are that they are not. Next slide. First of all, we need to be aware that when the pig was domesticated, which really has not been that many years ago when you think about it, the only grain that it was fed, or the major grain, was corn. And we relied on all of the proteins and the minerals and the amino acids in corn to bring that animal to market weight. Now, it took a long time for that to happen, and oftentimes these pigs were a year old before they were slaughtered. But in the early requirements, the only thing we knew about was corn. Since that time, however, there have been tremendous amount of research articles conducted, or research projects conducted, looking at the amino acids, the energy, and all the requirements that pigs have. And the area that probably has lagged more than any other area is the mineral area. And I'll talk about how behind the mineral area is relative to the other important areas. There are several publications relating the requirements of the pig, and two of them that I have denoted here, from the National Swine Nutrition Guide, which was published in 2010, and the NRC, which is published in 2012. All of these are very important and used by the swine industry. The NRC is probably looked upon as the gold standard and is used as the major comparison for most of our research. Next. If we look at the mineral area, we find that basically, if we look at the scientific information that's published, most of the mineral area and the vitamin area was published in the early 20th century. Probably after 1970, there has been a minimal amount of research conducted with the exception of selenium. And so, with all of this research that has been done, the last 40 years have really lagged behind in the mineral area. But there are major things that can be challenged as far as minerals are concerned. Next. If we look at the requirement tables, and I want to refer now to you to the proceedings that you have in front of you, because I couldn't get all of this information on a slide, or if I could, it would be a very small print. And so it's just better that if you look at the publication itself. But in the table 1 on page 12, you'll notice that at the top of that page is the the mineral requirements of the growing pig. And you can see there, basically, I've got some of them starred, and some of them are as denoted. There has been very few changes from the last 1998 to the 2012 publication or requirements for minerals in as far as the growing pig is concerned. And therefore, then, it begs you to wonder what kind of things have occurred. What are the changes that have occurred since 1970 that would tell us that the mineral requirements are different? First of all, and probably the most important thing, is that our genetic lines have improved tremendously. A few years ago, we made some presentations showing that lean tissue, muscle, increased in mineral retention. Therefore, a pig that has a large amount of muscle will have a larger amount of minerals that they not only retain, but also require in their diet. And therefore, then their requirements are different than what we used to project. Pigs grow faster, they're heavier, they're at market weight, they're leaner, and so therefore then all of these characteristics will show us that the requirements are different. There's more metabolism taking place. If there's a faster growing pig, if there's a greater body weight, they're metabolizing more nutrients. Not only are they requiring more amino acids and energy, but all of those metabolism reactions have an antioxidant factor involved in it, which involves copper, zinc, iron, manganese, and selenium. And therefore then, as our animals grow, and as the modern pig is developed, it has a different requirement than it did 2 or 3 decades ago. Feed processing has changed. You know, when I first came into a faculty member at Ohio State, corn and soybean meal was the answer. In fact, that was the only answer that we had. But since that time, we've had several feed ingredients, whey, distillers grains, all of these things have been processed, and in the processing of these grains, we have improved their digestibility, not only of the amino acids, but also of the minerals. Another thing that has occurred is that pigs are weaned earlier today than they used to be. When I first came to Ohio State, we were weaning pigs, or it was common practice, to wean at around 35 days of age. Well, those pigs were heavier, but they also had an opportunity to have a greater amount of carryover from the dam. When we start weaning pigs earlier, the carryover that effect that we have is much poorer. Another important thing, and I think it's been underemphasized, at least as far as the micromineral area, is the enzyme phytase. Phytase, we all recognize, releases phosphorus. But did you know that it also releases, or has an effect, on releasing the microminerals? The microminerals, however, are important in the aspect that they are part of the grain component. And once we incorporate phytase into a diet, we are changing the innate or the indigenous micromineral content of that diet as far as the availability is concerned. Next. If we look at and include the innate or the indigenous microminerals, what changes need to be made in the diet formulation? And again, I want to refer you to table number 1, but I want to refer you to the lower half of that table. I have calculated diets that we used later on in our study, but that is the innate content of those diets without any premix added to it. So it is the normal copper, iron, zinc, and I use the diets that I've got formulated, that I've got denoted up above. For example, in the first case, it was corn and soybean meal, dried whey, plasma protein, dicalcium phosphate, and limestone. There may be other diets that differ for the nursery pig, but basically that's a typical conventional diet. As far as the grower-finisher pig, it is also as denoted. You have corn, soybean meal. More recently, we also have distillers grains. And all of these things contribute minerals. I have calculated the mineral content of those diets. I've used the diets that I've got denoted. And you'll notice that when you look at that mineral content of the innate, a lot of times it exceeds that of the requirement. So if it exceeds that of the requirement, why is everybody adding a trace mineral premix? And that's the challenge we wanted to project to the pigs in which we did projects with. Next. If we look at the bioavailability of the innate minerals, in Table 2, this was a study that was done a few years ago by Jim Jolliffe, who now is with AGI, and he looked at the effect of calcium and phosphorus and the effect of organic and inorganic minerals as far as their bioavailability or digestibility. You'll notice at the top of the chart, of the table, that calcium and phosphorus have an effect on not only their digestibility, but also the digestibility of the microminerals. If you look in the first two columns, you'll notice that the innate, which is the indigenous microminerals, that calcium and phosphorus also have an effect on the digestibility of those minerals. Oftentimes, we have a tendency to supply additional calcium and phosphorus, and what I'm saying here is that can be detrimental to the pig. And a little bit later, the importance that I'll bring out. Now, the importance of organic and inorganic. If you look at the tables that I have there in Table 2, the bottom half, you'll notice that as we increase the calcium and phosphorus, that it has an effect on the microminerals. It's not as noticeable in the inorganic on the high level of calcium and phosphorus, but in general, I think we can say that there is an effect on the microminerals by calcium and phosphorus. I've summarized the organic and inorganic factors in Table 3. And you'll notice in this case that organic minerals, and I use the Bioplex minerals in this case, the organic minerals have a slightly better digestibility. Now, further studies would probably show there to be a greater difference because, again, that's the main effect of the calcium and phosphorus levels that we used. But a lot of times organic minerals have been kind of poo-pooed or looked upon as not as important as inorganics. And what I'm saying here is that at least the organic minerals are as good and maybe, in fact, even better, particularly since calcium and phosphorus is less likely to chelate an organic mineral because the hydrolysis of that mineral occurs at the surface of the small intestine, not in the digestive tract. And so I would suspect that as swine nutrition goes, we will probably emphasize more toward the organic than the inorganic. Next. We therefore did 2 experiments. They were designed about the same. And so I want to emphasize what our design was and what important approaches that we use that I think are going to be important in identifying the trace mineral levels. First of all, we always talk about amino acid balance. We always talk about calorie-protein ratio, but we talk about calcium-phosphorus ratio, but we really never talk about the balance of microminerals. So what we did was we used one core level of microminerals, and we used the NRC, thinking that probably it is close to as good a balance as we know of today in providing it to the pig. And then we provided various levels of that trace minerals at 0, in one case 25%, 50%, or 100% of NRC. Keep in mind, they all have the same ratio of minerals, it's that the quantity is different. We use conventional feeds, as I indicated in the bottom half of Table 1. Those are the feeds that we use. In fact, that is the analysis of the diets that we used in these experiments. We added phytate. In most research studies, phytase is not added, at least when you're evaluating the microminerals. And then the other thing is that we added paline. We wanted to exacerbate the requirement for these trace minerals with a high lean growth rate, particularly during the latter part of the growth cycle. And so we added paline to the last 3 weeks of the grower finisher diet. We used organic and inorganic minerals, particularly with the weanling pig, but we used the organic with the grower finisher. Now I want to emphasize one other important thing that I think has been underestimated, and that is a lot of times you'll read a scientific article and it will say the performance of pigs fed blah 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 resulted in good performance. Performance may not be a critical criteria. In fact, it may not be very sensitive at all. And so what we decided to do in our experiments were to determine the performance, hematology, mineral analysis, and that was done at Ohio State. We also looked at liver and small intestine metallothionein. That was done at Michigan State. And then we also looked at the antioxidant enzymes that contain these microminerals, that is copper, zinc, manganese, and selenium. And so therefore then, our approach is to look at all of the factors that could affect these requirements. And as this requirement is influenced by one of these minerals, we ought to get some kind of a fluctuation. Next. Let's look first of all at the performance, and that's in Table 4. You'll notice that with the weanling pig experiment, we got no growth response to adding microminerals. In other words, the basal diet during the first 21 days performed just as well as we did when we had 100% of NRC. That is probably responsible to the carryover effect from the sow. And therefore then, if the sow has nourished the pig properly, and I should say these pigs were weaned at around 17 to 18 days, and therefore then they had enough carryover to prevent any kind of problem as far as performance was concerned during the first 21 days. You look at the next series of times from about 35 days or from 21 days on, you'll notice that we're getting a response to about the 50% NRC level. Now, before I go too much further, I want to just emphasize that is probably due to zinc. And we'll bring that out in a few minutes. But the emphasis here is that the basal diet has a lot more importance, or the non-formulated, non-fortified diet has a lot more importance in pig performance than higher levels of NRC. The grower finisher pig in Table 5. Basically, I want to emphasize the fact these were fast-growing pigs. They were fed paline during the last 3 weeks of their growth cycle. You'll notice that those pigs reached market weight at less than 5 months of age with no supplemental trace minerals and with paline. And you'll also notice that this is in conflict with some of the other scientific research that emphasizes the fact that you need a high amount of zinc during the latter part of the period. We showed no effect of that. And so therefore, by feeding paline and still feeding no trace minerals, we still got just as good a performance. And as I indicated, our performance was very good in that we were weaning, or we were marketing pigs from birth to market at less than 5 months of age. Next. Let's look at hematology. Hematology is obviously the blood results. And the blood is responsible for carrying metabolites. It's also responsible for carrying oxygen. And therefore, hemoglobin is a critical component of that, and that's because of iron. You'll notice that the innate content of our diets really were pretty high in iron. That is attributed to largely the macromineral sources that we added to our diet. Macrominerals are basically high in iron and manganese. When you add them into the diet content, there's adequate iron in order to meet the animal's needs. Now, I should say here that hemoglobin and hematocrit, both indications of iron sufficiency, were low and they declined in the basal diet. Others of you might disagree with me, but I feel like about a hemoglobin level of about 12 is about where it should be, and you'll notice that some of those got down into the 10s. But you'll notice also that after 21 days, that the hemoglobin and hematocrit increased, and therefore they did not differ. Now, there's been some research which has been done which shows that a fast-growing pig has a higher iron requirement anyway, and therefore then these pigs, being fast-growing, were providing adequate iron, particularly after 21 days. The grower-finisher pig in Table 7, you'll notice that there's no difference in the hemoglobin and hematocrit, indicating that the basal diet with the corn, soybean meal, dical, limestone combination provided adequate iron in order to meet those requirements. Now, next, let's look at some of the more biological aspects of this in the next table. Metallothionein. Most of you probably don't even know what metallothionein is. Metallothionein is a transfer protein, or it is a retention protein. It's found in at least the liver and in the small intestine. In the liver, you'll notice that the metallothionein in the weanling pig basically was no difference for the first 21 days. And then it increased in metallothionein after that. As I indicated, metallothionein is a reflection of the storing of zinc. Now, it may also store other microminerals other than zinc, but at least zinc is associated with metallothionein content, and it's thought to reflect the zinc status of the animal. At 10 days post-weaning, no difference in metallothionein as far as the liver was concerned. At 10 days post-weaning, the duodenum has increasing content to 50% of NRC. The zinc is absorbed in the duodenum. You'll notice that in the jejunum, which is the segment lower than the duodenum, it does not absorb much zinc, and therefore then there's no metallothionein in there. So there is some evidence here that zinc is being absorbed by the weanling pig, and that its requirement may be higher, at least meeting the metallothionein requirement. Talk about metallothionein in a minute or two, but I want to emphasize one thing. Just because a mineral is stored doesn't mean that it's being used. And so metallothionein is probably a good index of the zinc content or the zinc status of an animal, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the body is just pulling it out and using it right away. As far as the, well, I guess that's the next one. In metallothionein with the grower-finisher pig. Now at this point, all the carryover is taken care of. There's been some absorption from the small intestine in the weanling pig, and you'll notice that The liver increases in this metallothionein to about the 50% NRC level. And the duodenum increases to about the 100% NRC level, indicating that there is an increased amount of zinc that is being absorbed and retained in the liver when additional zinc is fed. Now, there's been some research recently done by Gretchen that indicates that the zinc requirement of our nursery pig is higher, and particularly when you put in there a fast-growing animal. And I think we need to emphasize the fast-growing animal because those are the animals that will exacerbate the mineral requirements. Overall, I think these results show that metallothionein increases the transport across the intestine and is involved in the storage of zinc. Next. Liver antioxidant enzymes, and we're talking here about copper, zinc, SOD. We're talking about glutathione peroxidase. Those are intracellular enzymes, antioxidant enzymes in the liver, so that as metabolism occurs in the liver and you get oxidants being produced from metabolism, they have to be converted to water. It's done that way through these antioxidant enzymes. And you'll notice from the weanling pig study in Table 8 that the antioxidants enzymes were not affected by dietary level of microminerals, both at 10 and 35 days, indicating that the body has a very high priority for the use of these antioxidants by the liver in order to prevent oxidative damage to the tissue. Now, that doesn't mean that it can't occur, but at least in most cases, I think we overemphasize the effect of supplemental antioxidants. Grower-finisher pigs, in Table 9, the liver antioxidant enzymes were not affected by dietary micromineral levels or the antioxidant enzymes. Next. Once a mineral is absorbed, or once it is consumed, it is either absorbed and either retained by the body, or it is excreted in the urine, or it is defecated. And so, theoretically, that as a mineral is absorbed, and it does not need it, it will store it in body tissue. And the liver has been associated with the storage of microminerals. And so we've always thought in the past that if we measure the micromineral content of the liver, it would give us a good index of the micromineral needs or the status of that animal. You'll notice here in this particular table that there were no differences in the liver content of these microminerals, meaning that even though the animal was consuming an increasing amount of these microminerals, they were flushed out into the urine, and they were defecated. Our digestibility trial that I showed you in Table 2 or Table 1 would indicate that that's the case. And therefore then, I think the liver is not necessarily a storage organ as we have traditionally thought. Now, there is a possibility that it does store some zinc. The role of that zinc, we really don't know. In other words, is it going to be important later, or is it important now? But there is some evidence that it does store zinc in the liver. Next one. So what does all this mean? Well, first of all, I think it means several things. First of all, we have underestimated the value of the innate microminerals. I think this data clearly shows that the microminerals contribute a great deal of nutrients to the animals. It also says that the current NRC levels, particularly of copper and manganese, are generally in excess of the pig's dietary requirement. And therefore then, additional iron and zinc we can probably justify, particularly toward the end of the nursery period, not in the grower-finisher period. The various biological measurements that we evaluated, be it performance, hematology, metallothionein, or antioxidant enzymes, are all very important, but they also basically show that our conclusions are basically valid in that we showed no additional response to these various biological functions. And so therefore then, do we really need that many? What's the application? Well, as I said, the pigs in this study were very healthy. They were very rapidly growing. And we may in fact need more minerals if the animal is sick or under stress. We did not evaluate that because, as I said, our animals grew very quickly. I think providing a dietary level of 50% of NRC seems to be more than adequate in order to meet the animal's needs. Now, this could save the swine industry some money. I estimated about $1 to $2 million. But the most important thing is that it has an effect on the soil and the water component of the earth. I don't know if all of you have followed the news over the last month, but in Toledo, they were having a major problem with the algae producing a toxin that made the drinking water unsafe for human use. Algae grow with nitrogen and these antioxidant enzymes, or these antioxidant minerals. As we continue to provide minerals in excess, and I believe most of you are providing above NRC, not just NRC. But if you start providing a lower level of these microminerals to the pig, he's going to do just as well. Carcasses are just as good. They're going to grow just as fast. And you're going to have a better relationship with the human population because you're trying to make the environment safer. To me, that is probably the major reason why we need to consider this. I think that because of the work that we've done and the other work that I would like to represent here, I think that the future NRC requirements should be based on digestibility, not on total or not on as a safety factor, which is what the current NRC has. And so we don't know this information. This is research that is needed in order to provide good information for the pig for the future. Next. So I thank you. I don't know if you have any questions or not. I would be glad to answer that for you. I do want to say one thing, and that is that I've been at this conference for about 14 years, and I've made presentations in about 12 of them. And I have really enjoyed talking to this group. I think they've been open. I know that sometimes that I have been controversial, such as the paper of today. And therefore then, to me, that's what research is to present to the edge of what we know and then try to expand our knowledge. And therefore then, I thank you for your patience with me. Thank you.